gas in it.
Previously on Ran When Parked.
Let's see what we can see.
Joe the Mountain Jedi has taken this 1985 Kawasaki ZL900, the Eliminator, and brought it from something that was just decorating somebody's back porch into something that makes really cool motorcycle sounds. We picked up this non-running 80s muscle bike that was destined for the scrap yard because it was showing low compression in a couple cylinders. And low compression has never been something to stop Joe the Mountain Jedi, and he was familiar enough with these engines to remember that they suffered from something called valve recession. A valve adjustment and a full carb rebuild later, along with some donated stick coils from a newer Kawasaki Ninja, and this thing was running just like a top. The Kawasaki Eliminator 900s are built to be backstreet brawlers, stoplight to stoplight demons, a true drag bike of the 80s. But what goes up must come down, and if this bike is gonna haul ass, it better be able to stop too. As Joe the Mountain Jedi puts it, we've got the go, now let's get the whoa.
We got our brake calipers off, we got our pads out of them and everything. The pads themselves are in pretty good shape. We've got plenty of thickness left on these pads here, if you can kind of see the cross section of it. There's quite a bit of meat left there. I'm making the executive / tight ass decision. I'm gonna go ahead and run them, at least for the time being, until I see how things do with these new brake hoses and how the brakes feel. If I need to update the pads later on down the road to something that's got a little bit more bite to it, I'll do it then. As far as the pads go, there's not a whole lot we need to do with these other than just hit them with some brake cleaner. We'll scrub them down with a wire brush just a little bit, just to knock some of the funk and crust off of them and everything. Now, one thing that we do want to do, I can't stand it whenever the brakes on a bike squeak. It feels like somebody driving a screwdriver into your head. What you can do is if you take the edge of this brake pad right here and you grind a little bevel in it, and when I do it, I'll show you guys how it's done and also how much I'm taking off of it. It's not much. But if you grind that little bevel into it and you take that sharp edge off, that'll kill about 90% of all your squeal that's ever going to develop on a bike that's got solid mounted rotors like this one does. We're going to set that stuff off to the side for the time being. We'll clean it up whenever we're starting to put everything back together. That way we're only getting dirty once. Because remember, we got 3 of these things we got to do, plus 2 master cylinders. Actually, no, my bad. 3 master cylinders, because we've got a clutch master cylinder, a front brake master cylinder, a rear brake master cylinder, 3 brake calipers, and we got the slave cylinder for the clutch on the side of the motor. So we're going to be busy today. This is one of the rare few times I honestly don't have a good workaround for not having compressed air. If you plan forward on this stuff, especially if you've got just single piston calipers where there's only one hydraulic piston in them like this, before you take it off the bike, what you can do, if you take one side off, you can pump the brake lever up and the hydraulic pressure in the system will push that caliper out. That's only going to work on one side. Once you pop this side out, you got a big open hole that you got to deal with, and it's not going to do you no good for getting the other side out. If you don't have an air compressor, start making friends with somebody that does, because this will make your life a whole lot quicker and a whole lot easier trying to get these things apart, because you just take them off in one piece like this. What we're going to do, lay a towel underneath them and then wrap another towel around them, kind of contain the spray, if you will, because it is going to blow a little bit of fluid out whenever you pop the piston. You take a rubber tip blowgun and be careful, don't get your fingers in the way, or else you're going to have an owie. You're going to have cartoon finger because it's going to be swelled up about 3 times the size it's supposed to be. Rubber tip blowgun, and you put it in the hole on the caliper where the banjo bolt's screwed into, and you just barely start easing air pressure into it, and pop! Piston comes out. Now that had some energy to it whenever it popped out of there. There ain't no mistaking it, it's out. Make sure your fingers are out of the way or else it's gonna hurt. Because look what it did to our towel that we had trapped there in the middle of it. It got a hold of that thing, beat it up a little bit. We got our piston out, and thankfully this thing's pretty clean. We ain't got a whole lot of corrosion we got to deal with on the piston. These pistons are stainless steel. This here, that's old brake dust and road funk that's burned in there, and that will come off with a little bit of brake cleaner, just some light work with some fine Scotch-Brite. Scotch-Brite's okay to use on these things, but you don't want to use sandpaper of any kind, because sandpaper is just too aggressive of a grit, and it will leave little fine scratches that will either cause the brake piston to try to drag, or it'll wear excessively on the caliper seal. It'll either start leaking in 6 months to a year, maybe a little bit longer if you get lucky, if not leak right off the rip. This entire shiny part of this brake piston, this is all the sealing surface for this rubber seal that's in the caliper body. Take our caliper, we'll take our little hooky pick here, and there's going to be 2 sealing rings in here. Usually on most calipers, the one closest to the outboard side of the caliper piston cavity, if you will, that's going to be a lot thinner than the one on the inside. The reason for that is this doesn't seal any fluid pressure. This is is predominantly strictly just a dust seal. It's so thin that it's really not going to do any kind of a job sealing fluid pressure. It's simply there just to keep the crap from getting into the caliper, contaminating and compromising that hydraulic seal that's deeper down inside. Now you do want to be careful when you're rooting around in there with a pick digging these things out, because you don't want to scratch the bore of the caliper. You can see here pretty plainly, this little thin guy right here, that's just the dust seal. And if you look closely here on the inside edge, I don't know if you can pick it up or not, but we're going to pretend that you can. There's actually a very small groove in that thing. So it's actually got 2 points of contact to try to keep all the junk and everything from getting around the brake caliper piston itself and getting back up to and damaging this fluid seal. The actual hydraulic seal is a whole lot thicker, and it's got a lot more ass to it than what the dust seal does. This is the one that keeps the fluid in and keeps the air out. That's the important one, and it's got to be protected by this little guy right here. California quiet. Florida Man first aid kit. You need this shit. Now you can get these little Scotch-Brite buffs like this for a Dremel tool, and it's okay to use them. 2 things. Keep them damp with a little bit of brake fluid, and also run them at low speed to where you don't dig in and take a gouge out of it. But that does a really good job of polishing all the schmutz off of these brake caliper pistons. And yeah, I know it looks gross right now, but so that's what we started with. That's what we got right now. And there's how it polishes up. Clean and smooth. Now all we got to do is spray it off with a little bit of brake cleaner, get it dry, get all the oils off of it, and we're ready to go back together with this. Told you, it's boring. That guy's ready to go back together. Did y'all see that? That was a love bug. It's a prehistoric creature that plagues Florida and the Gulf Coast states. They are the scourge of mankind and should be exterminated whenever possible.
What are you using to clean up the inside of that, Joe?
Well, for getting down in the little nooks and crannies and the grooves on the caliper body where your dust seal and where the hydraulic seal itself lives, the safest way to do it is to get, just a plain brass brush, do it by hand. Where that hydraulic seal lives and where the dust seal lives, any kind of corrosion or schmutz that you've got down in there, it makes a high spot that'll push the rubber up, and that in turn causes drag on the brake piston. You want to get all that stuff out of there. It needs to be nice and clean, but you got to be careful not to gouge anything when you're doing it. For the really nasty, crusty spots, just be careful. You can take a pick and you can kind of peel them out of there and scrape them out of there like that.
Now, that ain't a sharp pick, though, is it?
Well, this is a sharp pick. I'm just being really careful with it because I've done this a lot.
Okay, I just want to point that out. So it's like, don't go jamming your freaking pick in there unless you're being careful.
Yeah, this is stabby.
California quiet.
Once you get the big chunks out, take either your brass hand brush or, in my case, because I'm lazy like that, get a brass brush on a Dremel and run it at the lowest speed you can. That's the key. You can take that brass brush and you can lay it in the groove and just follow it around until you get a nice, clean, even surface. You want to stay out of the bore here because you don't want to create any low spots there that might cause a piston to cock to the side or get hung up or anything like that. But this works real good for cleaning out the grooves in the caliper body where the seals got to live. The best way to do these is with a brake cylinder hone, but these weren't bad enough to warrant doing it. And also, I don't have one right here right now, so I'm showing everybody how to do it with the bare minimum of what you got on hand.
Not everybody's going to have a brake cylinder hone. If you're doing them all the time, I guess you could invest in one.
You don't have to spend mega bucks to buy one. You can buy an effective cylinder hone that's going to do, calipers similar size to this. 20 bucks or thereabouts on Amazon for a decent one. But you got to have a cordless drill to run it. What are you going to do if you ain't got a cordless drill? Well, you got to buy a cordless drill. So a brass hand brush, it looks like a brass toothbrush. It may take you a little bit longer. You're going to get the same results, and it's going to save you a lot of money.
I'm always forever just buying kits that come with new pistons, and they're wildly expensive. I need to stop doing that and just clean up the old pistons.
There's one caveat to that. If you've got a piston where it's got significant pitting, especially on the surface where the seal's going to ride, don't throw good money after bad. Bite the bullet, go ahead and buy you a new kit that contains new pistons, because what'll happen, these are not stainless steel. This is what is basically referred to in the industry as hard chrome. It's a very thick chrome plating, and it builds up as a wear surface. If that gets chipped, it's going to make a pretty significant divot in there, and if that's dragging across this little bitty rubber hydraulic seal, guess what? It's going to cut it, it's going to leak, it's going to drool, and your brakes ain't going to work worth a crap. You're going to end up doing the whole job all over again. You see any pitting on this? Use your noodle, pump the brakes, bite the bullet, spend the money, get the parts that you need. You know how you're always knocking the red straw off of a can of brake cleaner or carb cleaner or something like that? If you cut it down where it's a little stubby guy, they stay around a whole lot longer.
That's tricks, man. Got one for everything.
Yeah. There's chunks, crap, and funk floating around in there. That's mostly what I've scrubbed out of the groove where the seals live. So you can imagine how much they were dragging.
I think a lot of people are really scared of brakes because they just don't know what's going on in there. Whatever you think is going on, it's probably a lot simpler than you think. It's literally just an aluminum body with a couple of holes inside of it.
When you get right down to it, yeah. There's not a whole lot of moving parts in your average brake caliper. Now granted, this is a very simple caliper. It's a single piston and it's a semi-float caliper where the caliper mounts on a bracket and it has the ability to slide side to side somewhat to center itself up. The more pistons you get in the caliper, typically the sexier they get. The basic principles all apply. You still got to clean out the grooves. You got to get all the funk out of them and everything. It's just you got more of them you got to do. I got to hit this one twice because that's gross.
Are you going to get that bore completely clean? How will somebody at home know that they've done a good enough job?
If you can drag your fingernail across it and not snag on anything, you're good to go. If you notice in this one, you can see those little dark shadows in there. Those aren't pits, those are stains in the aluminum, because this is just raw aluminum. It doesn't have any kind of a hard coating or any anodizing on it or anything. That was from water that was sitting down in the stuff that used to be brake fluid. This is why I harp on people so much about flushing out your brake fluid, because it prevents crap like this from happening. At the end of the day, that's just a cosmetic thing, and it's not anything that's going to compromise how well the caliper works or how long it's going to last. And I've still got a little bit more cleaning I got to do. If you look down in that groove, you see the funk I'm scraping out of there? You want to make sure all that stuff is gone, because what'll happen is that makes a high spot underneath that rubber seal, and like I said, that's what causes the seals to drag. This may look familiar. We were just here. This is number 2 out of 3. Now, just to give y'all a heads up, these caliper kits for this bike are extremely economical. They come with everything you need, nothing you don't. It's got the 2 seals, it's got the little rubber dust booty for the bleeder valve, and plus, more importantly, it's got the bellows and the guide bellows for the slide pins where the brake caliper bracket mounts to the fork. These kits are $9 a piece at nichecycle.com. Luckily for us, all 3 of these calipers use the same caliper kit, but it's kind of like being stuck in Groundhog Day. It's kind of like being stuck in Groundhog Day. It's kind of like being stuck in Groundhog Day. Shit! The trick with getting in the grooves on the caliper body, that dust seal groove is barely wide enough to get one of these little Dremel wire wheels down inside of it. So you got to be real careful, or else that thing will spread out and it'll turn into a big spiky ball, and you won't ever get it down in the groove to where it does any good cleaning. The actual hydraulic seal groove, that thing's big enough you can throw a house in the thing. But that's that.
You'll notice that Joe's pretty economical with that brake clean. There's no freaking overspray.
I've worked in a shop with some guys that use that stuff like it's bottled water. I mean, they'll bash it against a friggin' tabletop counter and spraying everywhere and hold the whole can up. I mean, when you got to pay for this stuff out of your own pocket, it adds up, man.
Yeah, I'm the king of wasting money, but Joe is teaching me the way.
Don't get me wrong. I don't have a problem spending money when I can justify it, and I'm not cheap enough to where I'm reusing chewing gum or buying my underwear at Goodwill, okay? Even I got standards. This cavity here is where one of the slide pins on the caliper bracket rides. Usually you don't see them corrode down inside here, but what you do see is, since they get just the tiniest smear of lube whenever they assemble them at the factory, that's the last lube that this thing probably saw since we got a hold of it. You got to clean that stuff out because it turns into this hard, crusty, goopy, sticky, it's like 6-year-old peanut butter. It's gross. Shoot a little brake cleaner down in there and you use one of these little wire brush kits from Harbor Freight. Personally, because I've got a lot of them laying around the house, shotgun brushes on a cordless drill works really well for this. Guys, listen to me. If you're digging into your gun cabinet and using shotgun brushes, make sure you use the phosphor bronze, okay? It's soft enough where it's not going to scratch anything. It's just like running it down a bore, all right? Just treat it the same. Don't use stainless. Nylon ain't going to get the job done. That's the way I check them, and this isn't in a book somewhere, just this is something I figured out and it works for me. After you push the piston in there, you put a little thin smear of that red assembly grease that they're going to give you with the caliper rebuild kit. You put that on the seals, and you put a little thin smear on the piston itself. You push the piston in and just kind of twist it as you're pushing in gentle, and it'll find its own center and it'll slip right in. Just to make sure that you don't have one of those O-rings rolled over on its side, because they're not an O-ring, they're square. These are a square cut seal. Usually the one that's bad about twisting up is this little thin piss ant dust seal that I was showing you guys earlier. But a good way to check to make sure that you don't have one rolled up, push the piston all the way into the caliper body, then thump it against your hand a couple times. Now, granted, I'm not moving it much, but I can feel that thing pop back in a couple times after, you know, I do that, because piston's trying to slide out of the caliper body just a little bit just from me thumping on it like that. That tells me that it's free and it's moving and it's not bound up from having an O-ring rolled up.
And you actually got all the crust off of it, because that's something else that could bind it up if you didn't clean it properly.
Yes, absolutely.
So if you're pushing them in and they don't slide in smooth and they slide in crunchy, you might consider taking it back out and doing a little better job cleaning it.
Hammer bad. Hammer good in some things, not right now. Hammer bad. Another thing, having the Dremel tool will help you. Cleaning off these threads on the bleeder screws, because a lot of your kits don't give you a replacement bleeder screw. Let's be real here. If they gave you everything, you'd be at about the same price point of buying a whole new caliper. Run that brass brush over the screws on the bleeder screw a little bit just to knock some of the crust and funk off of them. And not only does it make them screw in there a whole lot easier, this is something that I like to do. Oh, that one stopped up. Man, we got to make sure we got that thing opened up where we can get fluid out of it. There we go. Before I put them back in the caliper, I'll take a little bit of Teflon paste. Before my clumsy ass dropped that shit. I'll take a little bit of Teflon paste, and I mean just a little bit. Barely any at all. But just put a little bitty dot, and I'm talking that kind of little bitty dot, on the threads and smear it around. You just want to make sure you don't get it on this taper, because this is what actually seals that bleeder screw into the body of the caliper. Threads up here don't have squat to do with sealing, but if you're working on your own and you're using like a vacuum pump or a brake bleeder bottle, or the trick I'm going to show you here in a little bit when we go to bleed these, this makes it a whole lot easier to bleed the brakes if you're working by yourself, because it doesn't let air suck around the threads on the bleeder screw whenever you release the lever, and also it keeps fluid from oozing out around the threads around the bleeder screw whenever you're bleeding it the way I'm going to show you.
When you're going through Groundhog Day here, which I'm sure you've done on bikes countless in memory, you figure out a couple tricks.
It's like being stuck in Groundhog Day. This is the part that I was talking about where we can kill off some brake noise here. You can see on this pad, it's got a little bit of funk, a little bit of crust right in here in this groove in the center of it, and just all around here. It's kind of gross. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a wire brush, just lightly drag it through there, knock that stuff out. Now this is only if you're reusing brake pads. This is the side of the bike that had the fork seal that was leaking. So it had a little bit of fork oil that had gotten down in there, but we're going to scrub these down and wash them to where we can save them and reuse them, because they got plenty of thickness left on them. You don't have to do much, just scratch them up a little bit and everything to where it knocks the glaze off the face of the pad here to where they'll seep back into the rotor. But before you put them back in the caliper, take a file, piece of sandpaper, something like that, and on this leading edge and this trailing edge right here, you want to just break that sharp edge off of it. Just give it a little bevel. See that? I didn't take much off of it at all, but what that does, that breaks this sharp edge here. It's kind of like how a turkey call works, or how your fingers scratch on a chalkboard. So if you do that, and if you're putting new pads in, do it on new pads too. This will reduce a lot of your potential brake noise on a set of brakes. Then after you do that, just take them, spritz them down with a little bit of brake cleaner just to wash off the dust, and then there's that. Then we do the same thing to our inside pad. I already scrubbed this one down with a wire brush, but I still got to put the bevel on them. And like I said, it doesn't take much. You're just looking to break that sharp edge off of it. Oops, that was my fingernail. That was still my fingernail. Real adult talk here, okay, folks? Brake pads have brake dust in them. Some of the stuff in brake dust, yes, it's bad for you, okay? Now, I got all this crap on my hands right now. I'm not done working, but I'm going to be done here in a little bit. And as soon as I get done working on the brake pads, I'm going to go and I'm going to wash my hands. Don't eat, don't smoke a cigarette, don't pick your nose when you got this stuff on your hands. That way you reduce the possibility of ingesting it into your system and potentially creating any kind of long-term health effects for yourself. Now, this other side wasn't contaminated with fork oil because we didn't have a leaky fork seal on the other side of the bike. So why are we doing this, you ask? Consistency. If you're breaking up the glaze that's established on the face of the brake pad on that other caliper, since there's two calipers and two sets of brake pads on the front of this bike, you want to do it on both sides, That way they bed in, and more importantly, they bite evenly on the rotor, because if you had one set of pads that was biting at, say, 50% efficiency, and its next door neighbor was biting at, say, 80% efficiency, what will happen, whichever side has the more bite to it, it will try to draw the bike off one side or the other until both sets of pads even out. It doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. So go ahead and take a few extra minutes. Make sure you're not putting yourself in that kind of a situation on the front side. That way you don't have to scratch your head and wonder what to do about it on the back side. I'm out so good, I decided to leave them raw instead of painting them because it looks good. You remember the crusty sight glasses we had falling apart and everything and turning into jello?
Yeah.
I poked one of them with my fingernail and I poked my fingernail through it. My normal source that I go to for replacement sight glasses on this stuff, I wasn't able to get them in time for this video, so I went to plan B. Took some stainless steel stock I had at the shop and I turned it down to a little bitty pizza wheel, if you will, to where it presses into where the sight glass used to be, and I've got some Loctite 680 thread locker floated in there around it to seal it up to make it fluid tight. No, we ain't got a window there anymore, but hey, it's 2 screws, okay? It's not that hard. Ugh, stickers!
I got a lot of those floating around.
Well, if they're floating, maybe you might want to try different underwear.
The older I get, bud, the older I get.
Same, brother. Actually, I can't gripe about them that much. All Balls makes a really good product at a really good price, and they give you everything you need. The only thing, it's more of a personal gripe than anything, but the only thing that the All Balls kits don't give you that I feel they should, I can show you in this brake crafter kit we got for the clutch. Brake crafter kit's a little bit more money, but it comes with the entire replacement piston assembly for the master cylinder instead of making you reuse your old one that may be grubby and crusty and kind of questionable. In this case, ours ain't too bad, so I ain't too worried about it. The All Balls kits, they retail for roughly about 30 bucks per master cylinder. Brake crafter kit, that kit in particular is for a clutch. That comes with a rebuild kit for the clutch master cylinder and also the slate. But if you look up just the clutch master cylinder kit from Brake Crafters, it comes in at about 35, 40 bucks. It's a little bit more money on the front side, but you get a new piston with it. And honestly, in my opinion, that's money well spent. That right there is exactly why I wish I would have been able to get one of the Brake Crafters kits for the master cylinder on this thing. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to because I didn't have it in stock at the time. I got to reuse this old piston, which that in itself ain't bad. But all this crusty funk that's on the back side of this is because the original weather boot, such as it were, it was just kind of along for the ride and it wasn't really doing anything. So now we got to deal with the aftermath. And just to give you a heads up, whenever you're having to reuse one of these pistons, or whenever you get a new piston that doesn't have the seals installed on it already, be very careful getting the old seal off and the new seal on. You don't want to scratch the body of this piston where it's going to travel inside the master cylinder bore, because what'll happen if you put a little scratch in here, it can make a tight spot to where it'll get hung up in the bore of the master cylinder and it'll stick. I already cleaned these, I already went through them, got all the crust and crap out of them. These are going to be in good shape, ready to go back together as is. If you'll remember from the autopsy video, we had pancake syrup in the brake master cylinder side. That washed out pretty easily, but one thing that we had going on, and this was contributing to our brakes dragging, you've got 2 fluid ports in the master cylinder. This little bitty hole right here, that's a pressure relief port, and that hole was plugged up. So what was happening, whenever we would squeeze the brakes, it would shoot brake fluid down to the front caliper. Since that hole was plugged up, when you let go of the brake lever, it wouldn't let that pressure come off, and that's why our brakes on the front were dragging as bad as they were.
This silicone won't interact poorly with brake fluid if there's a little bit left over in there?
Just a little tiny bit that you're using for assembly purposes, no, it ain't going to affect nothing. I wouldn't spray half the can in there, but you have to use restraint.
Restraint? I've never met her.
I know. Self-control, restraint. I know for a lot of people those are foreign terms. Fuck you, quiet.
California quiet. When it comes to women and restraint, Madam Hexa moved back to Germany, but she is coming to visit soon.
To help you get that piston seal over this and down in its groove where it lives, after you got a little silicone sprayed on it, hook underneath it and get underneath it like that, and then push it through and have the tail of it coming over here. And that'll help you spin the seal over that edge of the piston, you see how that just helps roll it over the edge of it, and it falls right into place, right like that. We got our rear seal on our master cylinder plunger here. This is the actual pressure seal itself, and if you notice that little titty that pops out right there, that's got to go in that hole in that washer. Now this is the return spring, and they make that hole just a little bit undersized on purpose. What you do is you push and twist to where that little rubber titty gets caught in the washer to where it holds itself in place. We're going to take just a little bit of silicone, again, don't drown it, and we're going to shoot just a little bit down in the bore of the master cylinder, just enough to slick it up and keep everything moving. Just push that in nice and square and make sure that it's not folded over. The spring is going to try to push it back at you, so be aware of that. But make sure it'll move, and looky there. We're almost home free. So here's the part that sucks. You gotta get that snap ring, and it's gotta hold the piston down inside the body of the caliper, but you gotta hold the piston down against the spring while you're trying to get the snap ring down inside the body of the caliper. It helps put that on a tabletop to where you can kind of stabilize it, and then use your thumb, or if you have a helping hand or neighbor or buddy or offspring around handy, have them push that down while you're getting the snap ring down in its groove. We're riding the struggle bus right now, folks. I'm almost there. I just got to spin it down and get it caught in the groove. Aha!
That sounded like a good click.
Now, just to keep things honest, we're going to take that snap ring and squeeze it down a little bit and rotate it just to make sure that it's seated in the groove and not sitting up on top.
When it comes to brakes, don't be afraid to double check it, man. Because you don't want to have to double check it when you're going 100 miles an hour down the road.
Last part, we got this little dust boot, and it don't amount to a whole hell of a lot, but it does need to be there. Don't put any grease or anything on this. Don't put any silicone on it because you'll fight with it. Take that and drop it down over there. Take your pick, poke the corner of it down with the tip of your finger, and just use the pick to stretch it around to where it pops in the groove. And there you go, that's there in it. After that, we're going to take a little thin flat blade screwdriver. You have to be careful because you can poke a screwdriver through that weather boot pretty easy. It is very thin. We're just going to push that ring around the perimeter of that weather boot down as far as it'll go in the body of the master cylinder to where it butts up against that snap ring. Just the stiction from the ring around that weather boot is what holds it in the master cylinder body. And there we go. We got a master cylinder rebuilt. Now, levers on this thing are a little on the crusty side, but they're straight, and we got them. They're paid for, and they work. We're going to use them for the time being. Now, if you guys remember a while back to the video that we did on how to buy a used bike, you remember how we pointed out that one part where the lever was going crick, 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 and it was binding up and everything? Here's how you kill that off. You got to find your lever pivot pin, which is buried in this bag of shit here. Here's how you make the cricky go away. Take a little tiny dab of grease, and you smear it on that smooth shank on the lever pivot pin, because if you notice, there's a little brass sleeve down inside the body of the lever. That's what this pivot pin pivots on, hence the name pivot pin. Spin it around a little bit to where it kind of gets the grease smeared around, gets it distributed fairly evenly. You're just looking for a very, very faint smear of it, because that's all you're going to get. Most of it's going to get wiped off, so don't just put a big blob on there, or else you're going to have a big blob you got to clean up. Before you put the lever on there, take a little tiny dot of grease, about like that, and just put it right there on the back of the plunger for the master cylinder. That rides right there, and whenever that gets dried out, I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit here on the sides of the lever here where they pivot in the side of the master cylinder too, just for general principle. Again, it doesn't take much. When you put that in there, right like that, and then you slide your pivot pin in, everything's nice and free. It moves, it doesn't bind up, and you don't have that cricking feeling that you feel through the lever whenever that lever's dry from it dragging.
Anytime I get a bike doing that, I've always just sprayed chain lube in there.
It's one of those things like, hey, I'm fixing to go on a road trip and you notice it, it's like, yeah, give it a little quick shot, deal with it when you get back, and nothing wrong with it.
Your brakes are progressive, so when they're sticking like that and you don't know exactly how hard you're actually pulling the lever, it really is a problem.
It can kind of jump up and catch you unprepared, and you may accidentally be applying a whole lot more brake than what you intended, and if you're pulling into a parking lot with some gravel or sand in it, you're in for a bad day.
Especially if you're riding an 80s bike with some spaghetti noodle forks, all right?
Yeah. That's what it sounds like when a mechanic has a fucking stroke. It's time to try out our Amazon brake lines here.
Now, we're not vouching for these yet, so if you're watching this video, give us a little bit to see if they're worth a damn before you go buying them.
If I do the whole Wile E. Coyote, chalk outline thing, yeah, can't recommend. All right, rinse, lather, repeat.
Groundhog Day?
Groundhog Day.
I was surprised that these Buddy Bezos specials here actually came with the sleeves installed on them. Now, you'd have to cut them off if you didn't want them, but...
Well, we 50% want them. On the front side of things, this is not an endorsement for liquid moly. .4 brake fluid is .4 brake fluid is .4 brake fluid. .3 and .4 brake fluid, I don't care what bottle they come in, they're all the synthetic brake fluid because it's a synthetic man-made hydraulic fluid. It's been that way since like forever. But it's what we had on hand and it's what we're using.
Basically what Joe's saying is buy the cheapest one.
Ain't nothing wrong with O'Reilly's or with Walmart stuff. It gets the job done just fine. Obviously, we're filling the system up from being totally dry here. It's going to take a little while to get all the fluid down to the calipers to where we can even start to bleed on it. But you notice how whenever I pull the lever, you see a little bitty bubble come up out of that front hole there? You will hear them right there. That's that pressure relief hole that I was talking about, and that's what's so critical about having that thing open, because that's how the fluid pressure releases from your brakes whenever you let go of the lever. If that fluid pressure doesn't release, the pads are going to drag on the rotor. It's going to build up heat. Whenever they get hot, the pads swell. Whenever the pads are swelling and they're dragging, it's clamping down on the rotor. And eventually, you either boil the brake fluid or you have a wheel lockup, kind of like what happened to me. If you guys remember, whenever I was showing you the process of rebuilding the calipers, I showed you that I was putting that little bit of Teflon dope on the threads on the bleeder screw. Here's why. These little cheapy party syringes like this, you can find them in the party favor section at Walmart. I think a 6-pack of them is like $2, something like that. I use the crap out of these things. And what you do is you just take a little piece of vacuum hose and you stick on there. You can take that, stick it on your bleeder nipple down here on the caliper, make sure it's a good snug fit. Yes, I'm using the open end. These ain't that tight. But you open that up, and then watch what happens when I pull on the plunger on that syringe up in the master cylinder. The fluid level will start going down, and it'll help you prime the system. Oh, hey, look here, we got fluid coming down. It might help if some dumbass would have tightened up the fucking line.
I'm rubbing off on you, Joe.
Bear with me, I got distracted. Shiny object. Now we got fluid moving down to our caliper, this one at least. This is where the syringe comes in handy if you're bleeding them on your own. Put that hose on there, and if you open up the bleeder screw, you got that little bit of Teflon on there to help it seal up around the threads. Then you can pull on the syringe and it will help pull fluid down into the caliper. And if you look up in the caliper, you can see the level dropping. I'm just trying to make sure I don't pull it down too low and suck air in it.
That kind of defeats the purpose.
Oh, look here. We got brake fluid in our syringe. Let me top up the brake fluid upstairs up in the master cylinder. Now that we got fluid coming down the caliper, you can crack that bleeder open, and when you squeeze the lever, watch real close in the syringe here. See how we got fluid moving up in there? Oh, there's some air.
Oh, so that creates a whole closed system where it has a...
Exactly. You don't have to sit there, pull the lever, open the bleeder, close the bleeder, let go of the lever. Saves you a lot of time because you can just pump it down through there once you get fluid moving.
And then watch all the air come out. Damn, dude, that is genius. I can't believe how much brake fluid I've spilled on the ground and how many times I've chased open and closed bleeder screws, rounding them off because they make them out of cheese.
Yeah, they do. Oh, there's a bunch of air coming up through there right now. That may be sucking air around the threads. I'm pulling on that pretty hard. But in this case, where the system was totally empty, we had no fluid in it whatsoever. It's hard to push fluid downhill when the whole system's full of air trying to go uphill. Air likes to rise whenever it's in a liquid medium. You know, think about bubbles in a bottle of pop. They all go to the top. You don't see them swimming downstream. That's the way air in a brake system behaves. A lot of times, if I get one that's being kind of stubborn and it doesn't want to start bleeding, what I'll do is I'll fill some clean fluid in the syringe, open up the bleeder, and I'll inject it into the caliper to where I'm pushing everything uphill, because as the fluid rises, it's going to take the air along with it.
Basically, buy a 6-pack of syringes from Wally World. You will use them.
Just don't look real scruffy whenever you go in there, and you know, if you got a twitch, you might want to pay somebody to do it for you, or else people are going to look at you funny.
Well, depending on what city you're in, they might not look at you funny at all, Joe.
Right? Oh, him? Oh, he's from McCurtain, Oklahoma. I better apologize for that. We might want people in McCurtain, Oklahoma to look at these videos someday.
Well, something tells me old Itchy and Scratchy ain't spending too much time on YouTube watching motorcycle videos.
So we got this side snug. You don't have to go crazy and just try to break the thing off. Just run it down until it bottoms out and give it a little just to snug it up and call it a day. So let's go over here to the other side. Let's open this up. See what we get. Oh, look there. Air. More air. And more air.
Cut through the Gordian knot with that one, bud.
See, the thing is, everybody in the shops, they use the vacuum bleeders and all that stuff. I mean, hey, if it saves you time and you're willing to spend the money on it, cool. Number one, you got to have an air compressor to use them. Number two, they run through a lot of fluid. If you've got an older bike where, you know, it's been on the road for 10, 15, 20 years, something like that, if your master cylinders haven't been rebuilt, and it's something I've seen several times on Harley in particular because of the way their master cylinder is designed. If you put one of those vacuum bleeders on there and you flip the lever and cut it loose and let it wobble, it'll actually start sucking air around the back side of the piston seal up here on the master cylinder, just because it's got enough wear that it's easier for it to suck air through that seal on the back side than it is to suck fluid down through that little bitty bleed hole in the top of the master cylinder reservoir. So you're actually pulling air into the system.
Sure, and I'm sure Snap-on somebody sells a tool for this, but you know, when you can make it from a piece of vacuum hose and a trip to Wally World, you know, why not?
Yeah, and the thing is, a pack of 6 of them cost you like $2-3 the last time I bought them. I'm still working on getting the last little bit of air out of the top side of it because we got fluid moving down to both of the calipers right now, but we still got a lot of air in the system. So if you look up in the master cylinder here, you can see whenever I just ease onto the brake lever a little bit, you can see that little bit of air bubble coming up out of our pressure relief port. So there's still air in the upper half of the system here. And we got to get as much air out as possible because think about it. We rebuilt the calipers. The pistons are pushed all the way into the calipers. So before we can build any pressure in the system, we got to get those pistons pushed back out to where they're clamping the pads on the rotor again, to where we've got some resistance to force the remaining air out. And it's a little fiddly and you got to be patient with it. Sometimes it helps if you let it sit for 5 minutes or so, because after you've been working on this for a little bit, what'll happen is those air bubbles will get broken down so small, the fluid actually becomes emulsified with air and it starts looking milky. That milky look is very tiny air bubbles. It's all mixed in with the fluid, and once it gets emulsified like that, you're never going to get it out. So let it sit for 5 or 10 minutes, take a walk, go have a beer or whatever. Let the air bubbles clump together into bigger air bubbles, because the big ones you can get rid of pretty easy. What I'm doing here, just to kind of speed the process, if you look in the reservoir, you can see a steady stream of bubbles coming up out of that bleed hole. Well, I'm going to push a little bit of fluid into the caliper down here by the wheel, and watch this. And bubbles picked up the pace there. Now I'm doing this kind of slow to where I don't accidentally spray fluid everywhere. Oh, there we go. We got a solid stream now, man. It looks like somebody shook a bottle of Dr. Pepper. And now we've got a solid stream of fluid. So I'm willing to bet our calipers will pump up now. Oh yeah, I can feel it moving the fluid through the lever.
So yeah, we might have had braided steel lines on this before, but
It got toasty.
yeah, they definitely needed to be replaced.
Yeah, somebody routed that a little bit too close to the exhaust header and poof. And that may explain where a lot of our fluid went, if you want to know the truth about it. Here's the funny thing about these slave cylinders for a clutch system. If you remember earlier on, we were using compressed air to blow the piston out of the brake caliper. You ain't even got to have that for this. Watch this. You know, you can bang it on a piece of wood and it will eventually work its way out.
So for those of you guys who don't know,
Kind of like that right there.
if you're unfamiliar with the term slave cylinder, this basically operates exactly the same way, almost exactly the same way as your brake calipers do.
Basically what it does is it transmits hydraulic pressure from the master cylinder lever up on the handlebar, and it takes the place of a clutch cable. Instead of pulling on an arm, it's pushing a release pin into the side of the motor. It's doing the same thing, it's just going about it in a little bit different manner. It's still got to be rebuilt because this one wasn't bad. And to be honest with you, we could have probably rolled with this and not had any problem with it, but judging from the state of the rest of the hydraulic system on this bike, you know, the brake calipers, the master cylinders, yada yada yada, all that, I'm kind of glad I went ahead and played the better safe than sorry card on this one.
Not a whole lot of parts to the slave cylinder. Of course, ain't a whole lot of parts to the brake caliper either. 2 seals and a piece of sliding metal.
Yeah, a precision hockey puck, if you will. The other day, I had a bike I had to make a brake caliper piston for because the part was back ordered, and this guy was a new rider, no fault of his own. Like I said, new rider, everybody learns. Don't nobody start trashing him in the comments. He had let his rear brakes get so bad, not only were they grinding metal to metal, the pad that the brake caliper piston rested against, it ground through the metal backing plate, and it actually ground about 1/4 of an inch off of the edge of the brake caliper piston itself. Obviously, we put a new rotor and pads on this thing, but piston for the brake caliper was on back order through Honda at the time. It's a stainless steel cup is all it is. Well, I got a lathe, I got a mic, I got a caliper. What am I gonna do? So long story short, he's back on the road. He's happy. Every now and then we do some stuff that's a little bit outside the box, but we do what we got to do to get people back on the road and get them back going safe.
Well, you know, taking an extra little bit of care with somebody who made a novice mistake and probably thought that they absolutely ruined their bike, and seeing you go make the part they need out of a hunk of metal, that's pretty damn cool.
Good dude. Good head on his shoulders. Just everybody's got to start somewhere.
You got to learn somehow.
Yeah, sometimes you got to learn the hard way, but you're going to learn one way or the other.
So do you use the syringe trick on the slave cylinder as well?
Sure can.
Oh, hey, as I walk over here, that's exactly what you're doing. All right, Joe. So what are we doing next on this thing?
Rebuilding brake calipers. Again. Like fucking Groundhog Day. Last one, I swear to God. Did you see a black cat walk past the staircase?
What are we doing? Rebuilding brake calipers?
Rebuilding brake caliper. Again. Oh, hey, look, we got a brake caliper rebuilt.
Well, they're coming to take you away, my friend. They're coming to take you away.
Right? This feels oddly familiar for some reason, but I can't quite put my finger on why.
Oh, that whole side piece, and this is all one thing, huh?
Whole big hunk of cast aluminum. That's the foot peg mount, the brake master cylinder mount, the whole shit caboodle.
I have never seen one set up like this before. Is this pretty common on Kawasaki's, or was it just this bike?
It wasn't just this bike, but this was kind of the way they were doing things back in the 80s. You know, they'd integrate the brake pedal mount and the master cylinder mount all into one big honking hunk of aluminum, and they'd be like, more beef.
Yeah, they weren't exactly worried about making them svelte.
Yeah.
It's funny that all the complaints people have against Harleys, a lot of the Japanese manufacturers were just as guilty in the 70s and 80s, man.
Well, okay, I'm gonna dive pretty deep into the nerd realm here, but they didn't have the facilities available to them at the time because the technology just wasn't there, you know, to do like a computer generated stress analysis of a frame design or anything like that. So a lot of this stuff they kind of had to either take on faith or go off of a previous design that they knew that was going to work and was solid, and it may have been overbuilt, but they never had a problem with the damn thing breaking, so they stuck with it.
This is the same concept that brought us so many turbo bottom ends from the 80s that were designed by the same dudes who designed cars in the 50s that could all of a sudden take 4-figure horsepower numbers when they originally made about 150.
Not saying anything in particular here too, Jay-Z.
Yeah, we'll take the overbuilt. Nowadays, everything with those aforementioned stress test computer analysis is, yeah, if you build it any higher, they usually end up breaking.
Nowadays, stuff is engineered to survive only at the point that it's marketed at. Past that, you're pretty much rolling the dice if you try to get any more out of them.
They call that an optimized engine. It's the term.
I have a different term. It's not appropriate for all audiences. We'll leave it at that.
Something I didn't even think about. It's just going like, yeah, you leave a little extra in there because not everybody babies their bike.
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest here, dude. I mean, anymore, 90% of the people out there that have been in the sport for, say, 5 years or less, they know two things: how to charge on their Visa card and how to put in gas. And that's about it. And it's sad, but that's a very inconvenient truth that a lot of people don't like to admit to.
I'm not trying to say I know any better, because when it comes to modifications, I'm just bolt the parts on. I'm perfectly willing to admit it, that all I can do is bolt on modifications. When it comes to shaping ports and pulling apart valves and all these things, I would agree with you and say that's probably starting to be a lost art.
Well, see, here's the difference though. You can admit that because you have a very analytical mind, and also you have enough age and maturity to realize, you know what, there is more into this world besides me, myself, and I. And there's somebody out there that has probably been here and done this before and may have written a fucking book or a pamphlet or something about it.
I've also gotten punched in the mouth a few times at this point. So
yeah, same time.
I've learned to keep it closed at certain points.
There's too many internet know-it-alls out there and way too many little spoilt-ass babies that will throw a fit and say, well, this sucks if they can't click an app on their phone and get it in 2 days or less with free shipping.
I don't want to say nothing, but yeah, I might have been guilty of that in the past. I'm learning that sometimes you just have to make a brake piston out of a chunk of metal. Groundhog Day is almost over.
Thank Christ for that.
Seeing as I don't think we'll have to show somebody how to rebuild these brakes again, I'll take the next round of brakes on the next bike we do.
I ain't bitching and moaning about it and everything because it's something that's got to be done and it's something I enjoy doing. But man, when you do the same thing over and over and over and over again, you start realizing just how bad your sex life would be if you were a gynecologist for a living.
Those have been on there for a while. Those ain't new.
Yeah, that's been a little warm from the exhaust. You can see how it's discolored there, but at least it ain't melted like the clutch line was. Now, if some dummy can remember to tighten up the brake lines this time.
We're in charge of editing, but you gotta leave a couple mistakes in just so people know that you don't have to be perfect.
I'm not. Never claimed to be. Thank God for that.
Yeah. If you were claiming to be perfect, I don't know if we get along as good as we do. Damn, Joe. Ran when parked. That looks like a motorcycle again.
At this point, we got to put tires on it and fork seals, and then we work on the pretty stuff.
Tires? They might be from the Clinton administration, but man, they got a lot of tread left on them.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of a shame to just pull them off and shit can them and everything. Hey, I got an idea.
Ran when parked. That is a fitting exit from the shop from the very first Ran when parked survivor, baby. Lives to fight another day. The ZL900. What is dead may never die. The Eliminator, baby.
Yeah, this thing ripped chunks out of the concrete.
Freaking love it, dude. That's the way you come out of the shop. Well, I think that about does it for this episode of Ran when Parked. We're standing here in a garage with the fruits of Joe the Mountain Jedi's labor over here.
It's a little smoky, yeah.
Doesn't need to be parked anymore. The Eliminator runs. We still got a few things left to do to it. We've got a whole nother episode of things to do to really make it street worthy, but it does burnouts. Big old smoky ones. Just like Kawasaki intended.
Yeah, sorry about the floor.
I ripped a couple chunks of concrete out of the floor. I'd say it's ready. As always, if you would like to further support our man here, Joe the Mountain Jedi, and his quest to save, not June bugs, his quest to save vintage motorcycles, one bike at a time, saving them from the scrapyard, make sure to check out his Patreon. Ran when Parked will always be a 100% free show, but if you'd like to help our man out here a little bit,
Appreciate it greatly. Thank you very much, and I hope you guys hang in for the next one because this one was fun. The next one, that's going to be a hell of a lot of fun.
I'm looking forward to it too. See y'all next time.
It ain't got no gas in it.